it's because you. Well, I know, but I'm just trying to figure out how to do it. Okay. Oh, we can. I think it's because you. Well, I know, but I'm just trying to.
Assalamu alaikum. Let me just admit everyone just a second. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome everybody to our Candid community conversation today. I am Samina Sohail, and my colleague and friend Shakil Ahmed is our co-host. And inshallah, we are going to be discussing mental health, depression, and suicide, one family's personal journey. And we have the Halim family with us today. And we really appreciate their courage in sharing their journey. And inshallah, just a few housekeeping items, and then we will go ahead and get started. As a reminder, we do these conversations really to the purpose of them is to inform and educate our community about issues relevant to our society. These conversations began in 2020 during the isolating times of a pandemic to virtually connect our community. What began as informative sessions about COVID evolved into thought-provoking discussions on a variety of topics, including race and discrimination in our country, the role we play as Muslim Americans to stand up for justice, and exploration of opportunities for engagement. All of these sessions have been recorded on ICGC's YouTube channel. As we proceed into the new year, we have expanded our discourse to raise issues relevant to our community. Mental health, depression, and suicide are not issues we openly discuss. Yet last November, Mason City Schools, which is one of our local school districts, had 15 students taken to the hospital for suicidal thoughts in less than a month. And as experts have pointed out, that is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the prevalence of depression locally and nationally. As we will learn from the Halim family, we as Muslim Americans are not immune to these issues. We'd like to begin by commending their courage to share their journey. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them ongoing peace and patience. Our goal in having this difficult, candid conversation is to establish the first step in bringing forth awareness and benefit. As a reminder, as an Islamic center, we are committed to upholding the values of our religion. And these views do not necessarily represent the views of the center and are entirely the views of the speaker. We are committed to bringing in diverse voices with diverse, relevant experiences. Unless otherwise stated, these voices are not experts or professional speakers imparting knowledge, but rather a conversation about their experience. And with that, I will ask Shakila to speak.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for joining us today. Samina and I, as she said, began these because there are complex topics that we as a community need to learn a lot more about. And then really support each other and engaging in bettering the quality of life and life in general for both our community and the greater community. And so that's really the premise. And today's session couldn't be more relevant in the sense that we have issues of mental health in our community, in our own families. And sometimes I think we are sadly a little behind the step in terms of recognizing those and really having the skills, the resources, the support that we need in order to address them, both from an internal personal perspective as well as from a family perspective and then as a community perspective. So our objective today is really to really use this opportunity and really the courage of the Halim family and really their commitment to their family in being willing and able to address this issue. And then we've brought in 2-3 other voices. And so we will be having them add their perspective and hopefully, inshallah, benefit all of us collectively. So it really is to benefit all of us and our community as a whole and the greater community in which we live. I want to start with just introducing the beautiful family. And I want to just, I'll begin with, other than Tabassum, who then will lead into the conversation that we're going to have. So we have Azim Halim. He's a graduate of Duke Medical School and is a practicing urologist in Illinois. Samina, can we just...
I think I have Azim here, correct?
Okay, there you are. Yeah, that would be great if you wave your hand so people, when you speak, they understand the perspective and, you know, your relationship with Armaan in particular. We also have Azim Halim, who's Armaan's oldest brother, a graduate of Wayne State Medical School and a practicing ER physician in Michigan. And with him is his lovely wife, Emily Mueller, who has a master's in social work from University of Michigan and is the director of at United Way in Michigan. In addition, we have Miraj Halim, who is the second oldest in the family. Miraj is a graduate of Northwestern Medical School and a radiology resident in NYC, New York. And Elena Barham, I hope I pronounced that correctly. Elena is a PhD candidate at Columbia in New York City. And then the youngest, the baby in the family is Nasser. Nasser is the youngest of the 4 brothers and graduate of Northwestern University and recently joined a consulting firm in Chicago. So, you know, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I want to go ahead and take a minute to introduce Tabassum, and this is her condensed bio, but I think it gives you, along with the other families, just how committed and engaged this family is, has been, and inshallah continues to be in the community and benefiting society as a whole. Tabassum has a, you know, balanced life as a loving, engaged mother of 4 boys. She's a Muslim American who's a community advocate and corporate. She served as a corporate accountant and has a master's from University of Chicago School of Public Policy. And she is currently a nonprofit leader. She served as the executive director for the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago, and currently is the CEO for the Islamic Networks Group, a national organization that really focuses on educational work that counters Islamophobia and various other really contemporary issues and forms of racism and religious stereotypes. And, you know, I've known Tabassum through our common work for, I would say, probably 20 years and have immense respect for her. And ICGC, full disclosure, happens to be an affiliate of the Islamic Networks Group, because we very much believe in this work, and our education and outreach work is very much in sync with the national organizations. So with that, I think what we would really like to do is, Tabassum, if you could, share Armaan's story with us before we get into the other aspects of the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shakila and Samina, for organizing this very important conversation and honoring us, our family, by inviting us to speak. About Armaan, I would start by saying that the essence of Armaan was that his internal compass was pointed towards goodness. I mean, that basically encompasses Armaan. And from a very young age, he was very God-centered. We have these funny little stories about Armaan. When he was little, he was playing with some coins, and he must have been about 2 years old, maybe 2.5 or something, just learning to speak. And he was playing with some coins. We told him not to, to be careful, and we try to keep him from putting it in his mouth. And he would keep doing it. He kept putting it in his mouth, and somehow finding those coins again. And finally, Azim just needed to let him know, that it was serious. And Azim and I are not very good at punishing the kids. So Azim reluctantly slapped his hand lightly. And oh boy, that got Armaan going. And he stood up, pointed a finger at Azim, and he says, "Daddy, you should not hit children. God will get you, Daddy." So even at that young age, he knew, had a concept of God and what God liked and what he didn't like. And then we also used to have, the kids had a routine of saying their du'as at night, right before they went to sleep. And each of the boys would say their whatever it was on their mind. And Armaan, I remember very frequently, he would say, "Oh Allah, I really try to be a good boy. I really try to be a good boy, but I just can't help myself." So he would, just very much centered naturally around this, concept of being good. And the couple of other things that really would describe Armaan was that he was very loyal. He really, all sorts of relationships in general really mattered to Armaan. And the way it manifested itself was that he was very social. When we would have the graduation parties for the boys, of course, like a typical Indian family party, we had multi-generations, everyone from my parents' friends to our friends, and maybe a few of the kids' friends. And that's usually the ratio. And Armaan would be whereas all my other boys would, of course, be courteous and social to everyone. But Armaan would be the one that went to every single person. And no matter what their age was, whether they were little kids or elders, he went up to them and talked to them. And that was Armaan. And loyal. He believed in. He was such a loyal friend and a family member in so many different ways. He was in middle school. There are these stories that I remember very distinctly. In middle school, he really wanted to start playing football. And halfway through his season, he hurt himself. And so much so that he couldn't continue on with the season, but he continued going to practice every single day. He would show up for practice just to help out the team. And not many other kids did that. It wasn't required of him, but he felt that he needed to be there for the team, whether he was playing or not. And he would do whatever little chores for them, carry the water or move the equipment, whatever it was. Armaan wanted to be there. And I just, and then so that was the essence of Armaan. As far as how Armaan actually lived his life, he had a great work ethic. He was very goal oriented from a very young age. Again in middle school, when he wanted to get on the football team, he needed to be at a certain weight. So he spent an entire summer. He was a little bit on the heavier side, and he wanted to just lose a couple of pounds so he could make it into the middleweight football team. And he wrote down, he did research about what weight he needed to be, and then kept track of his own weight and kept track of what it meant to eat healthy. And this was when he was in 7th grade. So he would have been about 11 or so, 10 or 11. And that pretty much stayed with Armaan. That was an integral part of who Armaan was. He was goal oriented. He loved making goals. He loved setting goals, and then what he really loved is, after he set the goals, figured out what he needed to achieve those goals, and he had the most fun working towards those goals. So that was Armaan. Just set the goals, work hard, achieve the goals.
So I know, in talking with both of you, Tabassum, and thank you for sharing that, because it's really important for us to understand the essence of who Armaan was, because sometimes people are remembered by one act or whatever it is that they hear, and they really don't understand the complex individuals and really, more importantly, the core of what Allah made them to be. Azim, maybe you can take a little bit of time and really discuss your perspective as a father, and maybe some of what are the signs that you began to see, and then how, first of all, how are you as a family dealing with this trauma? Share his story and the struggles that he had in the later part of his life, and then we'd like to hear from his brothers and his sister-in-laws as well.
Right. No, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. No, I wanted to just continue a little bit about Armaan and what kind of a person he was. He wanted to go into medicine, and I'm a practicing physician. He set his goals very high for himself all through high school, all through college. His work ethic was just phenomenal. I don't think I've met anyone that works as hard as Armaan did. And as a father, as I was watching him grow up, of course I felt very proud of him for having that kind of drive and work ethic, and I wanted to encourage that. And as a father, I think our main, at least from a traditional standpoint, the role in the family really is as a provider. So, I wanted to raise the four boys to be good providers, for their families. So I really was happy to see Armaan kind of, go down that path as well. And of course, we all encouraged that. Um, and then somewhere through high school, somewhere through college, I started seeing, and I'm sure everybody else did too, that sometimes even achieving those goals did not give him the satisfaction that you would have thought somebody would have felt, when he achieved, when he got a grade. For him, it wasn't good enough. And he really got hard on himself because he didn't do better. And we, told him, no, this is pretty good. Don't be so hard on yourself. Be careful how you talk to yourself, and, um, give yourself, that space to enjoy. So, as the time went on, um, we saw that a little bit slipping away, from Armaan, that even when he achieved very good goals that we thought were good for him, it wasn't good enough. And the sense of joy very slowly started to, leave his life. Um, but, it's hard because, you want to give the boys their space to be who they are, and you didn't want to tell them what to do, and how to live, and all those little things that as a parent you just, it's a very difficult position. You feel like you can help, but you don't want to help too much. You have to give them that distance to learn a little bit, the school of hard knocks, I guess, in life. And so, but we all saw this happening with Armaan, and unfortunately, it became worse as time went on. And in the medical field, having been through it, having living through it, and then seeing my boys go through it, it is very competitive, very competitive. And so much so that, now I'm starting to question, how do we really define success in our families? And should it always be about academic success and success in, in in the in this world? And maybe we should put more focus on keeping our mental health and well-being, as if not a number one position, as a very close number two. And again, I get back to, as a provider for the family, you have to achieve certain things. That's part of what life is. That's part of what Allah, wants us to be. But so, some of this I think is natural. I think all of us go through that. And so I didn't want to take that away from Armaan. And then at a certain point, it did not look right to us. But it's hard to separate the two. It's not an easy call. It's not an easy call, even having lived through it like we have now. And so I would caution all the families that if you have questions about what is okay and what is, going a little bit too far, please reach out and talk to people around you. Talk to your children's friends. Talk to, your neighbors, and just be in touch with them. And don't be afraid to reach out to the mental health profession. Very important resources are out there for all of us to tap into. Um, and we steered Armaan into all those directions. Before I go on too far, I just, I want to say that a lot of this now is in retrospect. And, it's easy to say we should have done this, we should have done that, but I'm, we don't go there anymore. because when you're in the middle of it, boy, it's really hard to see, that the clock is ticking. So,
So I'd like to interrupt you just for a minute here. When you say, as a parent, you saw that he wasn't happy with things that you would find. Was it that he was pushing himself too hard, or were these external forces? What was it? Do you know?
so what we saw, I mean, I can't really explain it. Maybe Sister Saba can explain it a little bit better. But what we saw is that when he would, do, I thought, reasonably well in the MCATs, he was hard on himself. He said, "No, I could have done better. I should have done better. I should have worked harder. I should have done that." And it seemed to me that he was. He didn't get a chance to appreciate the fact that he did well on his MCATs. He didn't give himself space to enjoy it, and we thought that was part of his competitive nature. So I didn't want to read too much into it, but those were some of the early signs that he was not processing some of these events properly. Does that help?
Yes. Thanks.
Definitely. So we can come back to you, obviously, because we want this to be interactive with the family. And but Samina, maybe we could ask one of the brothers to really kind of share about the later signs and what they saw. And because, from what I've seen and knowing you, that I do, you're a very close family. And so you wonder, how can something like that happen with a close-knit family such as yours?
So who would, I've listened to Nasser's account, but I didn't know who wanted to kind of move us along next.
I think, Azam, were you, do you and,
Emily.
because you were in Chicago along with Nasser and your parents, and I'm not sure if Miraj was there as well, but I mean, what happened in medical school? What were the things that you saw? How is it that he dealt with you as siblings?
Yeah,
So,
Asma and Nasser, maybe all three of us kind of mute ourselves and then we can kind of
Okay,
speak together and then we can.
absolutely. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Asma, if you want to start off, then maybe me and Nasser can.
yeah, for sure.
I'll
Sure.
go.
Okay. So, first of all, Emily and I are both in Michigan. So, and through a lot of this, Armaan was in Wisconsin. So we would hear. I spoke to Armaan quite frequently through medical school just to see how things were going, because I went through the same process. So I knew how tough it was. But starting from fairly early on, he would start mentioning how he was feeling that he was feeling like stress from the competitive nature of medical school, which made sense to me. It is really tough, especially the first year. But as that first year, the first semester kind of went farther and farther, he would start to mention things how he felt like the other students were against him or other professors were against him. And even though he was doing well, people were trying to backstab him and undermine his successes and things like that. And, initially I kind of shrugged it off as, again, it's a very competitive environment. Maybe that's true. When I went through school, there was some elements of that, but it wasn't overtly so. You kind of just shun the kids away that are like that, and you just make friends with the ones that are nicer, and it's not too big of a deal. But then as schooling went on more and more, the same complaints he had would resurface over and over again. And that, I think around second year is when I start to realize that something isn't quite right. And started to again press him on things, but he would be very superficial with his description of what's going on. He would kind of blow things off when I would press him on it. But then he would always come back to the same people are starting to undermine me, and no one wants to be my friend here, or no one wants to be a genuine friend, which we later found out was completely untrue. The real issue started to come up when he took some of his big step exams. Like Dad had mentioned, he had done very well on his step exams, but in his mind, he had essentially failed them, and he was not going to go anywhere in life with the step exams with the scores he had. Again, we tried to reason with him, but none of that seemed to get through. And again, looking back, it kind of this is simplifying things very much, but we still had the repetitive nature of things were against him. He wasn't doing very well in school, and he was going to fail, even though none of that was true. And then finally, third year is when he started his clinicals, and that's really when that's when I spoke to him quite a bit more, and he would really, every single time I would talk to him, he would say the attending physicians were, they didn't have any confidence in him. His fellow resident, or the residents he was working with, did not believe that he could do any of the procedures, or that he was terrible with the medicine. And occasionally he would give me glimmers of positive experiences that he had, but there was certainly a lot of these negative, I'm just not doing well and everybody is out to get me type of complaints. And I would try and reason with him, and because at this point it really seemed like, okay, something's not right. There's no way it is this bad anywhere. So this is when I start to talk to him about going to therapy, and he would adamantly refuse to do that because he was afraid that A, there was nothing wrong with him, and it was everybody else that was wrong, and B, it would get out that he was going to therapy, and that would undercut his career even more than he had already been messing up his career. Again, none of that was true, but this is what at this point, his delusions were starting to become.
So this was his third year in medical school?
This was during his third year in medical school.
Okay.
So as third year dragged on, and I do say dragged on because that's start to see how that felt. He would have some ups and downs. He would have some rotations, because the rotations were about a month long or so, where he would say, things are going great, I feel really good, everybody really likes what I'm doing, etc., and doing really well in my little mini exams that they have every month at the end of each rotation. And then there'd be other times where it was just the complete opposite. And this just kept getting worse and worse until step 2, when, like Dad said, he really thought again, he did very well on this, board exam, and he said he failed. When I called him to congratulate him, he was like, "Why are you so happy? I failed this test. I'm going to fail in life." And that was a point where that's when we started to realize that something was really, really wrong. This was towards in fourth year. And that's when we first really started to press him to get to speak with a therapist. And but again, all of that was for naught, because he in his mind believed that he was in the right. Nothing was wrong with him. And no matter what we tried to tell him, what the therapist would try to tell him, he would always just say, the therapist believes that there's nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. Everybody else is wrong. And you need to stop blaming me for these issues. Finally, it came to a point where he did express some thoughts of wanting to hurt himself, and we tried to get him to see a psychiatrist. He did once, took some medications, was put on antidepressant. It helped him for a couple of weeks, but then he stopped taking it because he said it didn't make me feel how I wanted to feel. I couldn't study. So that he stopped doing that, and from then things just spiraled downhill very quickly until finally in October he took his life. I mean, and that's a very oversimplification of what actually happened, but it's trying to put 4 years of what his experiences were into just a few minutes. But it was the real the real summary of everything is that he's now looking back at it. These ups and downs were probably his starting of his experiences with bipolar disorder, and he was having like probably auditory hallucinations where he was having these voices tell him these things. And again, this is so easy to look back in retrospect and kind of put it all together. But that's kind of, it just sneaks up on you in a way that you wouldn't see. I don't know. I'm an ER physician. I see these patients all the time and saw bits and pieces of it, but it was hard to put things together until it was a little bit too late. And that's kind of, I think, what we're trying to open up to other people. So other people are, anyone else that's feeling in a similar way that Armaan did, or have family members that are feeling and going through the same thing. I hope that they are able to open up more freely and be more accepting to help, because that's ultimately what hurt Armaan, was that he was unwilling to get help, and he was afraid of what the stigma of being diagnosed with anything would do to his career. Whether he was right or wrong in that feeling, that was a big thing. And
there is some validity to that, because
yes, there
I
is.
mean, we fill out our board applications. That's one of the questions they ask us, like, have you been treated for mental health or something? So, you know, it's not completely unfounded. So.
It's not, and I did have that discussion with Armaan quite a bit as well, and he was right. He knew exactly what being diagnosed with bipolar disorder or being committed to a hospital would do, so he knew to hide that. He knew to hide what he was actually going through from the psychiatrist and from me, because the second I was waiting for the moment for him to tell me what he was actually going through, so I could get him into a hospital, and he never gave us that opportunity. Even looking back retrospectively, I can't find a time where he would have let me do that.
And so also, like, so the pandemic hit in March, and he was near the end of his 3rd year, and just an isolating time altogether. And then 4th year comes around. Maybe Miraj and Elena could share a little bit more. What happened next?
Actually, I think I can chime in kind of later, but I think here Nasir would be the best person to talk about this, because they were the ones who were home together.
Okay.
So, Nasir,
Yeah, I can definitely share about this, but and sometimes the timeline for me gets a little muddled because it all kind of sneaks together. But it was so when we came back home, as soon as the pandemic hit, so Armaan came home too, and I don't know the timeline of like med school stuff, so I can't tell you like when, but all I know is he was studying pretty consistently. And I think at this point, on a day-to-day basis, I noticed a lot of different habits that he had that I had just never seen before. And I really was like, this is a completely different person than who I've known my entire life, or even seen very recently. Because we had all gone on vacation in December of that year, and he was doing pretty okay then. Like, I mean, but when we came back home in March, like everything was completely different with him. He would there were times when he would just walk in a circle in our kitchen and just for like 10 minutes at a time and just kind of like stare off into space. And I knew he was thinking about something whenever that was going on. And as soon as he would come out of that like trance, he would usually ask my parents this question about whatever, like 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever. Like, do you guys remember like when you did this? Do you guys remember when this happened to me? Just again, these things that were bizarre and can't really explain it. So that was obviously like a sign that something was wrong. And I know so me and him, we shared a bathroom. And another thing I noticed is like, he had just started to use my toothbrush. And again, like I was like, how do I tell someone like, hey, stop doing that? Like, that's odd. So I just like took my own toothbrush from somewhere else and I was like, all right, whatever. And occasionally I'd go into his room where he was studying, and he would be like not even studying, he would just be staring off into space. And other times he would be studying and then he would come downstairs, start talking to us, me and my parents, and just be like, I was just up there and I was just so angry. And it was difficult. It was very, very difficult. I myself was going through a time because I like was in school, but I was like, I don't know what the job market's going to look like. And I don't know, like, this is rough right now. And then when Ramadan happened, every night, me and him would go downstairs together and he would open up a little bit to me, about what was happening. And he would kind of just open up with these delusions about our history, about things that are specifically that our mom did. And say like, do you remember like when she like, I don't know, did this, like messed up with my application or something like that. And I was like, Armaan, I was there. Like, that's not what happened. And for me, it was the way that I looked at it is that I was like, all right, we're going to start like on square one. We're just going to try and debunk each one of these delusions one at a time until maybe at the end point, he's like, all right, none of this happened. Like one of the people I trust most in the world is like, is not, we're not on the same page. So maybe there's something wrong with me. And it's just, and that never happened. 30 days, every single night, a conversation where he would talk about how hopeless the future was, how much, how people were wronging him left and right, all these delusions. And one of the last nights, and it's the one that really sits with me the most because it's the most painful to think about, is that we went downstairs and he grabbed some ice cream, and this time like I was just playing video games and he was finally like, dude, I like, and his like voice cracked and he was like, I don't think I'm gonna make it. And at this point I just like I stopped what I was doing and I was like, Armaan, like, we're all here, like we're all supporting you, our whole family is here, you're doing well, like, and you're gonna be okay. But as soon as that happened, it's like he was like on the verge of breaking down and then he wasn't, and he just went completely quiet. And to me, that moment haunts me a lot because I think, knowing what I know now, I think at that point I would have said, Armaan, like, we're gonna go to the hospital right now. But it's one of those things. And so that's what quarantine kind of looked like for us. And when And then when Ramadan ended, when that time ended, he went back to Milwaukee, and shortly thereafter, like, called my mom and said that he was having suicidal thoughts. I want to kind of end right there because I do want to have Miraj have time to talk right now.
Thank you, Nasser. And I did share the quote from the wonderful tribute you wrote to him. And a lot of that was captured in what you just said. So thank you for sharing.
And I also want to let people know that, you know, as difficult as us listening to it, this family lived through it. And so Nasser, immediately after in October, did write in his remembrance of Armaan a lot of this. And so maybe Samina and Nasser, if it's okay with you, we can share that, you know, as a part of the conversation, that people can just read your perspective as his younger brother, because I know he was your role model. He, you know, I remember reading that you would go to him for everything. And so, you know, the tables had turned. And so sometimes we don't know how to act when that is the person that we have always gone to for support, guidance, comfort, whatever it is. So I think it would be beneficial for people to be able to read that. Miraj and Elena?
Yeah, I think I can, you know, have a few things to say. And I think what I'll just say is, like, I think Azam and Nasi kind of gave like a pretty good, just like practical, like timeline of what happened. And maybe I'll just share like a few like overall like lessons that we've kind of taken away from this, or like thoughts we've had in this whole, whole experience. And I think like like none of us are psychiatrists, but obviously some of us are in like the just medical field like in general. And I think like our big takeaway, and like the thing that we would really just sort of like make very clear about Armaan's situation is that like this, everything that we've said, like this sort of like some of the behaviors that he was having, the things, the thoughts that he was having, stuff like that, like we all are very much in agreement. And our understanding about this is that this is not something like, this was not like a state of mind that Armaan like put himself in. This is not like something that he brought upon himself. Like this is something that happened to him, and this is not something that he had like any control over. And I think kind of like our, like, you know, Osman and Nas were talking about, you know, when we look back in retrospect, like so on and so forth, things are very clear. And, you know, that is certainly true. But what I will say is like very hard in the moment is that like there are many times where we would be talking with Armaan, and like you don't want to make somebody feel like something is wrong with them. Like you want to validate the things that people are saying. You want to make them feel like they're being heard and being understood and things like that. And like that was the, you know, I think someone had brought it up, like how does this happen to a family where everyone is so close? You know, the way it happens is that it's almost like the trap that not that Armaan intentionally put us into, or not the trap that we all intentionally, you know, let happen. And that is, you know, you want to make someone feel good and validated and things like that. And you don't want them to feel like weird or strange or something. But at the same time, like anytime this conversation started drifting towards Armaan, you know, maybe there's something that like you should, you know, we can help you with, or like there's something that like maybe you can find help for yourself with. The conversation would basically end with him being like, oh, you think there's something wrong with me? Like you think that there's something, like this is my fault. And I know Azam touched on that quite a bit. And I think this is where sort of like we hope to make an impact, is that at some point Armaan lost insight into like his own thinking. Like he was unable to take himself out of like the sort of mental constructs his mind had created. And he was unable to like step back and see and be like, okay, wait, maybe they, you know, are onto something. Maybe they have my best interest at heart, and maybe I can listen to them. And so I think the time that Armaan could have been saved would have been much, much, much earlier, when you know, he would have had the ability to have insight and things like that. And you know, like my dad was saying, like Azam was saying, there were hints of this for some time, but I think even back then, had we, you know, when we were having these conversations with him, anytime it kind of started going towards like, maybe we can get you help, it was very much like he would get very defensive. So I think our goal in all this is to lower the barriers to getting treatment for people who still have maybe some insight into their thinking, like lower the stigma. So if somebody who still has the ability to do it for themselves can be like, okay, like maybe there is something going on and I'm not afraid to find help for that. So I think that's, if I was to just kind of, and you know, Mom, Dad, Ozan, Massey, Emily, Elena, if I miss anything, like I think just overall that's kind of like what we are hoping for here.
Yeah.
And really it's to take, and I would say the other thing is that like we want to make sure that there, both for Armaan's story, that there's like no shame in any of this.
Yeah.
Like I think people have been surprised that we've been so open about this, but for us it's like, well, what is there to hide? Like this is, if Armaan had died of cancer, it would have been the exact same thing. Like this is a disease that he had that killed him. And
So when
I
we
don't know if it, well, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Raj, if you feel like it'd be worth it, if you'd want to talk about like the call that all four of us had in the middle of the summer, that might offer a little bit there too.
Yeah. So basically like towards the end of the summer, probably like early or mid-September, and this would have been about a month before Armaan passed away, it had been clear that he had stopped seeing his psychologist and he had stopped seeing his psychiatrist and he had stopped taking medications. And so Nasser basically contacted me and Oz and being like, hey, like, we need to, at this point, we need to just basically have like an intervention because nothing else has worked. Like us, being like taking the route of validating things he was saying, listening, all that stuff, and none of this is working. So maybe if we try and really just confront him, maybe, but just kind of explain to him some of the things we've seen, maybe then he'll have some more insight. So the three of us called them together. And again, we're trying to be as neutral as possible, just being like, hey, like, these are the things we're seeing, and very just really emphasizing we care about you, we love you, we're trying to help you, really. And I think what was really striking with his responses were that even with as much like support and like love and like our neutral sort of like way of approaching him, all of his responses were, again, I think like validating his own internal sort of like his own internal like mental state.
Hello, JP.
And so we asked him like, oh, well, what has the psychologist told you? Like, what were your conversations with that person? And basically he said that the psychologist was validating his feelings that, this was like Mom's fault, or this was the med school student's fault, things like that. And when we asked him to explain it to us, it was very clear that he had picked up like one sentence that the psychologist had said, and that was what he was constructing his entire narrative about. And for the three of us, we were like, this is terrifying. Like how, like the fact that his mind is picking up on this one thing and basically was constructing his like memory, it's kind of scary. And I mean, that's just like one, again, like a little snapshot. We had a number of different things that we talked to him about, that was the case. So again, like that, Nasi, maybe, that's why you want me to talk about this, but like, it's an example of, again, when you get that late in someone's disease, the just like shocking lack of insight that they have.
So that just reminds me of something that Brother Azim said yesterday, and perhaps you could share it today about the analogy you gave, like if someone has a heart attack.
Sure.
Share those thoughts. Yeah.
No, I think Raj did a great job describing some of that, but let me just add a few words. And, we do want to take some questions from people, but let me just take 1 minute and, as a physician, if someone calls me and says, look, I've got chest pain, I mean, what am I going to ask them to do? I'm going to say, go to the emergency room, man. You need an EKG like right now. How is this any different? When somebody, asks for help or is acting, completely at odds to who you think they are and what they should be saying and doing, the barrier to say, listen, I think you need to go get help should be a lot lower. This is an illness like anything else. It's like a cancer, you know, a cancer of the mind. And there are different levels of it for sure. Not everybody's going to have the level that Armaan was dealing with, but these are illnesses and we should treat them like that. This should not be a taboo subject. If somebody has chest pain, they go to the emergency room and they get screened for a heart attack. If somebody has suicidal ideations, you know what? They need to be in the hospital. That's where they need to be. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what we, as you know, we do want to allow some time for question and answer, but I think we just want to put some other things in perspective before we, you know, open it up for question and answer and conclude with a dua. Dr. Ashraf Tabulsi is a very respected member of the community, and really he's worked with my young man and, you know, a lot of youth, and so and he does many of our khutbahs as well. So we wanted to just have him just share his perspective from, you know, an Islamic scholarly perspective, and, you know, and as a community leader perspective. So Dr. Ashraf, if you would like to take a few minutes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Really, I just want to start by thanking the Halim family for their courage and sacrifice, and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease their pain and suffering and grant them the peace and tranquility on account of their efforts to help educate our community about this very important issue. Also pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have his ultimate mercy and forgiveness on Armaan and keep the family pleasant and give them rida with his place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah rabbil alameen. I would also like to thank Sister Samina and Sister Shakila and the organizer who organized this whole event, because of it's important to the community, and it's an underestimated subject in general. In general, there is a lot of misunderstanding and ignorance about the issue of mental health in the Muslim community. And we hear a lot of things around in discussions with youth, with adults, you know, general things like, you know, can a true Muslim have a mental issue? We can deal with depression with just prayer and dua, you know. Sometimes the issue of is suicide haram, and is the person who died from suicide, are they in the hellfire, and so on. So I will touch just on few of those and I would important issue, and I just qualify that I'm really no Muslim scholar to give an opinion in here. It's just some of the learnings that I've learned through working with my own boys and with the youth of the community. So first starter, mental health issue are real issue from an Islamic perspective, and we cannot dismiss them. And it's just an issue of ignorance and misunderstanding. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran mentioned the issue of exacerbation and concern and distress many times in the Quran. In one of the verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talk about Prophet Yunus, وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَن لَّا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describing that Prophet Yunus as he has been picked up by the whale, and he's inside the darkness of the whale and the darkness of the sea and the darkness of the night. He was calling upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there is no God except you. Indeed, be glorified. I have been among those who wronged themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the call, and he says, فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. We answered his call and we saved him from the distress and from the concern that he is in, acknowledging that these things, these mental states are real, and acknowledging that we go through ups and downs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, says, and that's how we also save the believers. There are other places in the Quran where there's mentioned. There are other places where the Prophet ﷺ says that whoever is being afflicted by a, being tired or being concerned or having a calamity or having a distress or exacerbation, and even a thorn that would afflict the Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would expiate the sin with this affliction. So again, acknowledging that these mental states of being distressed and being concerned and so on are real, and the Prophet ﷺ acknowledging that. So, however, when we talk about dealing with mental health issue, it cannot be dealt only with a spiritual component. And that's what we need to understand in our community, that dealing with mental health issues have three different components. It's almost like a three-legged stool. Spiritual component is one of the components. The other component is professional help, seeking, the help of psychiatrists, psychotherapists, counseling, and so on. And the third component is the family support structure, the family and friend and community support structure. Each of those three components are equally important. I will touch on the spiritual component a little bit from several points, not necessarily, very detailed. First one is, yes, spiritual component is very important in dealing with mental health issues, seeking the help, seeking, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, we tend to oversimplify the spiritual component. And what I mean by that, we talk to people in a way where we say, go make dua, read Quran, increase your salah and things will get better. The spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires perseverance, require consistency, require building that from early on in childhood through the family upbringing and so on. We need to understand that making dua is not like a flip of a switch and things will change in no time. Dua is an active process. It requires sincerity and consistency and long time to be answered. Not necessarily, it's not going to be answered on the same day. This is where the role of the family, and this is where the Halim family touched on the upbringing of Armaan, and they have done that. But I just want to emphasize this for the rest of our community. There is a role for us as families to build that in our children, and how we, translate those Islamic principles and understandings on how we deal with things, not through lectures and just telling our kids how to do it, but rather through our own behavior, by role modeling it, how we deal with difficulties, how we deal with issues that is difficult, and setting the right expectation with regard to issue of success, as the Halim family just mentioned. And then the second piece I want to focus on is this whole issue of halal and haram, and how we tend to kind of oversimplify everything to this very narrow perspective of halal and haram. And what I mean by that is that, with regard of the issue of suicide, it comes a lot, is the question of, is suicide haram? Are those who die from suicide are in the hellfire, and so on like that. Though the Prophet ﷺ mentioned this and he indicated that, however, this was a generality that the Prophet ﷺ talked about. There are other contexts that the Prophet ﷺ talked about, and in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, there are other stories about one of the people who was migrating to the Medina, and during his migration, he fell ill and he became so exacerbated that he took his own life by slitting his wrist. And one of the companions who were traveling with him saw that, and eventually saw him in a dream in paradise, and without his hand. And he went to the Prophet and he narrated this to him and he explained to him what he saw. And the Prophet ﷺ prayed for the man, and he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him forgiveness and cure his hands. He did not indicate that this man is in the hellfire, because the Prophet ﷺ was taking this in context. And that's what we many times fail to do, is we look at one generality and we generalize. We do not look at the context and the circumstances. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not hold a soul to accept what it can bear. He deals with every soul with the way that it through its circumstances, through its conditions. So, and I want to give another example, not necessarily related to mental health, but this issue of halal and haram and how we deal with it in a very narrow perspective. We know theft is haram, for example, but according to our Islamic Sharia, somebody who steals to feed his children because there is no other resources to give them, We cannot implement the punishment of theft on them. This is in this dunya. How about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's side? So this Allah and his prophet explained to us what is halal and haram as a mean of deterrence. It is not a license for us to go and judge others. We cannot judge others. We should be compassionate towards others. And that takes me to the third point, which I want to make, which is we need to defer judgment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah is the judge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "In al-hukmu illa lillah." So we should abstain from judging people on these what they go through, what they experiences. Rather, we need to be compassionate. We need to be understanding. We need to listen to them. We need to provide counsel. We need to provide, advice. We need to be there for them when they need us. Again, I'm going to just give an example about this and how we cannot just take things based on appearance and based on what do we think is right and wrong, and just, not necessarily understanding the inner playing and the inner circumstances of each situation. Imagine somebody dies in a masjid while praying. Generally, we think of this as a good sign. But what if that person has an intent to steal the collection box of the masjid? How would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deal with him? On the other hand, what if somebody dies in a strip club? Again, we will look at that as a bad sign. But what if that person is there to save a trafficked underage girl from sexual slavery? Allah knows that. We don't know it. We don't know all the circumstances, all the details, so we should very much abstain from judgment. Rather, we should be there as comforting, understanding, compassionate friends for our friends, or family member for our family member. And then the last point I want to mention, which is the point about family, the role of the family of building, specific understanding in the minds of our youngsters and in our own mind. Generally, our life today is very easy. However, it's extremely complex compared to the old days when life was very simple. However, it was very difficult. So there is a different context. What we went through, our children are going through something totally different. They, a simple bullying on social media for us is a big deal for a teenager. So we need to take things from that perspective, and we need to understand the importance of those issues to them and its impact on their mental health. And at the same time, take them out of the comfort bubble that they live in, and again, show them, make them live and understand the reality of people who do not have what they have, so they can put their own life in perspective. Lastly, I want to mention that this issue is real, and it could affect any one of us. If we take all of the means, if we really do everything we need to our children, it just could happen to anyone. As the example of the Halim family, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with them. It's not due to the lack of their effort or their work or being aware or anything, but it just happens. Our role is to be aware. We should not be dismissive. We should educate ourselves. We should learn how to spot the warning signs and be there as helping advisors to others. And then others, at the end, I would really want to end by praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us all as a community to understand this issue of mental health as a wholesome issue in its totality, as a complete picture, and help us deal with it as on the individual, family, and community level. Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah.
Ameen. And thank you, Brother Ashraf, for really giving us these important reminders. As you've alluded to, and as also Armaan's dad alluded to, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. This is just starting to understand what's going on. And we're going to say this over and over again, how much we commend the Halim family's courage for doing this. May Allah truly reward you and put it in your book of good deeds. Moving along, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Yasmin Irfani. She's currently the Director of Youth Programs at the National Alliance on Mental Illness for the San Fernandino Valley chapter in California. She received her master's in counseling with an emphasis in college counseling and student services. She's a certified instructor for suicide prevention training called QPR, standing for Question, Persuade, Refer, as well as an instructor for mental health first aid. And that's actually a training that we do hope to bring to ICGC before Ramadan. Rehma Community Services will be coordinating that effort with American Muslim health professionals who brings that training. So for my community, please keep your eyes and ears out for that. And with that, I'd like to welcome Sister Yasmin.
Thank you so much, everyone. For the sake of time, I'm going to jump right in, but thank you to the Halim family. You honestly inspire me so much, because never in my life have I heard of a Muslim family opening up about suicide. Never. Like, only through private conversations, but to be open in public about it, that gives me so much hope that our community can change, even if it is a slow process. And whatever I'm sharing in these brief few minutes that I have, it is a generalization. Suicide is one of the most complex of all human behaviors. Even the suicidologists don't have the answers to everything. So I hope that this is helpful, inshallah. Okay, so I just want to give a few reminders. The first one is for us to take care of our own mental health and lead by example. We may not be able to change the world, but if I cannot sit with my fear, my anger, anxiety, hurt, sadness, then it's really hard for me to be there for someone else when they come to me. I might get emotionally triggered and be unhelpful when they're trying to open up. So we should definitely lead by example. It's how we act, it's our energy, it's our presence, our intentions, rather than just what we say. So this could look like going to your own individual therapy and healing yourself so that you can have more space for others in the community. Second reminder is to never underestimate the power of empathy and non-judgmental listening, which was someone had kind of mentioned earlier. Because what we know is that just being heard can be really healing, especially in our community when sometimes we're quick to jump in and try to rescue and save others, to give advice, those lectures. It's really not helpful when it's going through mental health challenges. It's better to sit back, hold space, and just breathe through as we listen, and then connect them to the appropriate professional help. And thirdly, we need to intervene as early as possible and focus on prevention rather than waiting until there is a crisis. So as Brother Azim had mentioned earlier about like treating mental health conditions like a physical health condition, we wouldn't say someone committed a heart attack or someone committed cancer. So in the same way, we shouldn't say somebody committed suicide. Suicide is death due to a brain illness. So we wouldn't, if someone was diagnosed with cancer, would we wait for many years for them to get treatment? No, but oftentimes the research shows that there is such a long delay in getting help for our mental health conditions. Many years. So let's please lean into the discomfort of these conversations. It can bring up a lot of emotions, but I applaud each and every one of you for being here for this difficult conversation. And then there's also a tool. I encourage you all to go through the full training, but I just wanted to share a few things about QPR, which stands for asking the question directly, persuading the person to get help, and referring them to the appropriate resources rather than trying to do everything on our own. And safety is always the #1 priority. So if we see someone is in danger or showing some warning signs, we don't want to keep it a secret. And throughout this process, as hard as it is, we need to stay calm. So the Q is for questions. We don't want to beat around the bush. We want to ask directly because we don't want to have any how do I say it? we oh my gosh, I'm blanking, but we want to be direct about it. So that could sound like, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? We need to use those words, even if it's very scary. And if you're in doubt of, oh, should I ask the question? Yes, ask the question. It does not increase the risk of suicide. And oftentimes it serves as a relief for a person that, wow, this person is comfortable talking about anything. Now maybe I can share what's on my heart. And if the person says, yes, we don't want to stop there. We want to ask and find out if the person has intentions to act on those thoughts. So that could sound like, have you decided how you would kill yourself? Have you decided when you would do it? Just saying these questions out loud makes my heart race so fast, but it's so important that we lean into the fear and find out we can know how much of a risk and crisis this is. The next part is the P, which is to persuade. This could sound like, I care about you. Will you let me get you help? As humans, all of us have yearnings to feel like we matter, that we're cared about, that we belong, that we're accepted. So this is something we all can relate to. And almost all efforts to help someone live will be met with agreement and relief, which is why we want to really intervene as early as possible, as I think Brother Miraj was sharing, that's not waiting until a person's thoughts are so, where a person's thoughts and their story is in a later stage. I can't speak for some reason. Okay.
You're doing great, Yasmin.
Thank you. So after that, we need to refer them to the appropriate resources. So this doesn't mean you just say, okay, here's the resources, bye. You need to be really active in the process. Take the individual to get help or make the phone call with them. Get other people involved. We don't need to do this alone. And here are some resources on the side, which everyone should have in their phone and be aware of. There's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, the Crisis Text Line, and Nasiha Mental Health, among many, many others. And we always want to follow up and check in, even if it's a phone call or a small text saying, I'm thinking of you, how are you doing? It's one of the most vulnerable things for someone to share what they're going through with us. So it's really important for us to validate them because what they're sharing with us is truly a gift, that they trust us with something so personal. And lastly, I want to become certified in mental health first aid or QPR suicide prevention, because each of us has the power to help save lives. And now the question is, will we lean into the discomfort and learn how to be part of the solution, or will we continue to allow this and shame to silence our sisters and brothers? So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. I think you covered such a complex topic in such a straightforward way, and something that we can all relate to. And you know, the one thing I learned is that sometimes, especially as a Muslim or in a Desi community, we're afraid to ask things or go to a place thinking that it's going to lead down that path, you know? So, and it was really helpful to know that, no, that can be a comfort spot for that person. That can allow us to open the door to maybe them talking and, you know, being able to seek the help. They may not be ready, but I think we taking the lead is really important and helpful. In that sense, I want to talk about the fact that, you know, we as an Islamic institution, we've done various programs. And I remember one of the ones we did with a group of counselors and health professionals. And so, you know, there's also a stigma of going to seek help because there's a fear that there would be no understanding of our culture, of our religion, the nuances of our family situations. And so what we need is help to also get over that misunderstanding. More and more, cultural competency is being done with health professionals. So even if they don't have a Muslim background, they are able to understand and relate to things that are part of our value system, but at the same time help the person. In that light, we also have now many psychiatrists. I think we're probably not as well prepared with the psychologists and therapists as we need to from within the Muslim community, but we're very blessed to have Dr. Sabah Chotai with us. She's a dear friend. She's a practicing clinical psychiatrist. She works with diverse therapists throughout the area. She sees, adults, adolescents across the gamut, and she's very engaged at the work of the Islamic Center. She does philanthropic work as a woman of heritage from Pakistan with an organization that she started focusing on peace and education. Pakistani, Sabah, you can say pals. But with that, I would like to not take any more time and turn it over to Sabah and really talk about this issue from a clinical psychiatric perspective in the very brief time we've given her.
Thank you, Shakila. While I was listening to all the speakers, I was also getting some questions, so I'll address them later. But let me start by saying that my heart goes out to the Halim family, and I am so sorry for your loss. And may Allah give you all peace and give Armaan the best place in Jannah. Ameen. I had prepared this, but after listening to this, I think there are more important things that I need to address first. First of all, when there is a suicide in the family, it takes a toll on the family itself. There is so much second guessing, there's so much guilt, there's so much doubt that only if we had done this, only if we had seen these signs early. So I think you probably have gone through this and are still going through this. So do not hesitate in getting help for yourself. That would be my advice. Because in families where there is a suicide, it actually affects the person is gone, but the family that's left behind, they keep dealing with the guilt for a long time. But believe me, it's nobody's fault. It's one of those tragedies that happens. Having said that, I do think that we all, as a community, as parents, and as a physician, as a psychiatrist, let me say that primary care physicians and pediatricians and school counselors should all understand what are the risks and what are the warning signs. And the reason I bring that up is many times if a child, there's a change in a child's behavior or their grades are going down or a young adult or a spouse, usually parents or the spouse will take their child or their spouse to a primary care physician or to a pediatrician. If suddenly a wife notices that her husband is very quiet, is not doing well at work, is very tired, is sleeping too much or not sleeping, she'll say, let's go to your primary care physician. And many physicians are really not trained in seeing the warning signs or the risk factors. So we don't have much time. So I'll quickly, let me say that suicide is actually a big public health problem. And overall, within the United States, it is the eighth leading cause of death. But among young people, age 15 to 34, it is the second leading cause of death. The number one is accidents, and the second leading cause of death is suicide. And in children 10 to 14, it is the third leading cause of death. So, and in the United States, there is, according to the latest data by CDC, it is the risk, actual suicide has gone up. In 1999, it was 10.2 per 100,000. It's gone up to almost 14 per 100,000. So it is a huge issue. There are about 132 suicides in the United States per day. So it is a public health problem. And let's look at some of the risk factors. And after listening to your story. The number one risk factor is mental illness, especially untreated mental illness. And within mental illness, the number one cause is mood disorders, both major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. And the risk of suicide is very high with mood disorders. It's somewhere between 15 to 20%, both if we combine unipolar and bipolar depression. Untreated mental illness is the number one risk. So also, this may not be pertinent to this case, but if you add to a mood disorder alcohol or drugs, that increases your risk fivefold. And I bring this up because many times people will not go to see a psychiatrist because of all the things you've talked about, stigma and how they will affect their career. And unfortunately, they may actually resort to alcohol or drugs to self-medicate to feel better. And that actually is a lethal combination. So we need to be very mindful of that, and we cannot judge people when they come to us and they say, I've been drinking too much, or I've been using drugs. We really need to look into it and look at the underlying factors. They may be self-medicating. So that's number one I wanted to point out. The second is lack of access or unavailability of good mental health treatment. And we may not realize it, but that is a huge problem for many reasons. Number one, many people do not go into psychiatry. I myself had to face a lot of opposition when I decided to become a psychiatrist. Many times it's thought that, oh, people who couldn't get into another residency, they went into psychiatry. It's very unfortunate, but that reflects our general attitude about mental illness. Since we don't give much importance to mental illness and we do not consider them biological conditions, which they are. They are truly biological. They just like if you have family members who may have diabetes, they are genetic. There's a huge genetic component. They run in families. They respond to medication. So they are biological conditions. But just like we don't consider them biological conditions, we also think that people who treat mental illness may not be doctors, you know. So this reflects our general bias towards mental illness. Also, we don't have the time for them, but the healthcare structure in the United States puts a tremendous impediment towards getting treatment. It is, I mean, half of my time is spent in getting authorizations from health insurance companies for visits, for psychotherapy. So that is a huge hurdle. But there is generally a lot of hesitation in seeking treatment for mental health, and more overall, but particularly within our Desi Muslim communities, because there's a general feeling that it reflects a lack of faith in Allah, or you're lacking something in your character. But that is not true. We have to remember these are true mental biological conditions. So number two factor is a lack of availability or access to not having access to treatment. The other risk factors are a previous suicide attempt that puts you at a very high risk. And sometimes we may not know that. Other factors include a family history of mental illness and a family history of suicide, puts you at a much higher risk. Male gender, being a man, puts you at a higher risk. Women actually attempt suicide more often, but men, in fact, end up killing themselves 4 times more than women. And that is because women tend to use methods that leave some room, give you some time for intervention, like an overdose. Men use very lethal methods to kill themselves. I don't know if you want to share that. How did Armaan? Okay, we won't talk about that. Anyways, which brings us to the next risk factor, which is easy availability and access to firearms. 50% of all suicides are committed by the use of firearms. So another reason to really work for gun control. There are many risk factors, we don't have the time for them. And all of them may not apply to one case, but factors like social isolation, fear of failure, especially among highly ambitious and very intelligent people, fear of failure is a big risk factor. A lack of social support, and sometimes young people experience that when they move away from home. That initial period may be very difficult for them, or a lack of connectedness, or a lack of solid friendships. And this is something we need to remember in case of young teenagers and adolescents. Another factor which is very interesting is what we call suicide cluster or a suicide epidemic. And we've seen that, I have seen that with Mason High School. For whatever reason, if there have been multiple suicides, it encourages other people to kill themselves. So we need to be very mindful of that. On the other hand, we need to address this issue, but you have to talk about that in a very responsible and very careful way. For younger people or teens, there are other risk factors. I'll go over them quickly. Bullying, issues with gender identity or just identity crises, not having friends, a history of trauma early in life, parental loss. These all put you at a high risk. But really, not everyone who has these risks will go ahead and commit suicide. The underlying factor almost always is an underlying mental health condition. As I said, in mood disorders, it's 15 to 20%. In case of bipolar disorder, since we talked about it, a mixed state puts you at a very high risk. A mixed state is when you're also experiencing depression. In bipolar, you can be manic or depressed, and you're also experiencing manic symptoms. So in a manic or hypomanic phase, someone can be extremely agitated and extremely energized. And along with that, they're feeling depressed. So this combination actually will make you go ahead and do something reckless. So a mixed state puts you at a very high risk. What are some of the warning signs? Because sometimes family members or friends, they may not understand and they may not realize the gravity of it. So we can roughly divide the warning signs into 3 categories. One is verbal, the other is behavioral, and the third is situational. Verbal is when someone says, I can't go on anymore, or I can't take this anymore, or I want to disappear. They may not actually say, I want to kill myself, but these words matter. Pay close attention to them. Behavioral is if there's a sudden change in their behavior, if they become extremely withdrawn, or suddenly they don't want to associate with anyone, they start giving their things away, especially their prized possessions, or they are thinking about setting their affairs, putting them in order, or suddenly a person who has been extremely upset and looks, you can see that this person is going through a lot of turmoil, suddenly that person becomes very calm, and you wonder, oh, why? Because they've kind of made peace and they've decided that I'm going to end it. So we need to be mindful. And situational is if someone who's already dealing with something has a serious setback, a relationship loss, financial loss, problems with job. So these are some of the things we need to be aware of. But I really wanted to bring up something, which is the issue of treatment and people resisting to treatment. This is more than a healthcare issue, it's a political issue. There is such intrusion now by healthcare insurances that people are genuinely afraid if someone finds out about their mental illness, it's going to ruin their career, their academic career, or in the first place, we are required to maintain complete confidentiality. And good psychiatrists, even when in your insurance company wants some information, they are very careful in and they only provide the bare minimum. The other recourse that a family can have if there is a family member who is seriously ill is to seek legal help. Because on one hand, after the 60s, when we had the civil rights movement, there was also a tremendous push for rights of for the mentally ill. And a lot of people who were institutionalized were deinstitutionalized, which was a good thing. But the flip side of that is that sometimes families feel very helpless in getting mental health because they have made it difficult. The autonomy of the patient is so important that it is not easy to commit someone. So that makes it harder for a family to commit someone, or which is basically forcing someone against their will to be admitted. So these are issues that we don't have an easy answer, but at least we need to be aware some of the risk factors and the warning signs. There are some protective factors too. Not everyone who has these risk factors will go ahead and kill herself or himself. But the protective factors are, of course, being in a community or in a family that views mental health as a true illness. Therefore, they are very proactive in getting help. That's number one. Easy access to mental health care is a very important factor. A positive sense of self-esteem and good coping skills. So those are some of the protective factors which will help people through crises. But someone who is dealing with a serious mental illness, which is not being treated, is at a very high risk. If that's the take-home lesson. The other thing I would like to say is I see that a lot in my practice where family members, it was not the case in this family. I really appreciate you bringing this to the forefront, but family members themselves are very reluctant in bringing the family member who's ill to a mental health provider. One, the concern that Shakila mentioned is they think that psychiatrists and therapists will not understand the cultural nuances of someone coming from a Muslim community. You know, the most important thing is to keep your family members safe. That is the most important thing. Don't worry about that. And most psychiatrists are very well trained and they do understand the concerns. The most important thing is to treat the biological aspect with pharmacotherapy and then also combine it with psychotherapy.
Thank you, Sabah. This is, you've touched on such critical issues, and clearly we need to have a follow-up to really delve into these deeply. I think, what we want to do is be able to answer some questions from the audience for the Halim family. And I know there's one question that just came: is suicide inherited? Is it, if you can just give a 10-second answer to that.
I did mention that if there's a previous history of suicide or a family history of suicide. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sent me a question if it's related to impulsiveness. And yes, especially if you add to the mixture anything that will lower or impair your judgment, your risk of suicide goes high.
Okay, thank you.
This just once again relates how much more we need to delve into this. I think if there is a take-home message, is that the Halim family, for all purposes, they check all the marks. They're religious, they're educated, they're, professionals, highly functioning family. And yet, they look like many of our families. And if there's a take-home message, no one is immune to mental illness and its consequences. And sometimes, pictures speak 1,000 words. And I'm just going to share some of the pictures that the Halim family shared with us, just to make you realize what a beautiful family this is, and how much of our duas they need, and how much we owe them to like Yasmin said, this is the first time I've seen a Muslim family talk about this, and that's
Mhm.
really a big deal. So this is the Halim siblings and their sister-in-law, and this Nasser, Miraj, Armaan, Emily, and Azam. And I think Tabassum, you had mentioned this was taken in Hawaii. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that was in Hawaii.
Okay, and maybe you can tell us about some more of these pictures. I have this one. Why don't you tell us about it?
And while Tabassum is doing that, if the audience could please type in their questions in the chat, because we want to be able to address your questions, but try to do it efficiently so we can wrap up. So please, Tabassum, continue.
Thank you, Shakila. This is the top picture is one of my favorite photos. This is, in the middle is, of course, Dada, Azim's dad. And to the left of him are Armaan's first cousin, Armaan and Nasser's first cousins, Mustafa and Ali. And then, of course, to our right is Armaan and Nasser. And if you notice, Armaan is holding his Dada's hand with his right hand, and he's got his left hand, left arm wrapped around Nasser. And that was basically Armaan. Whenever we took photos, he would pull everybody close and take photos like that. And then the bottom photo is, of course, us. This is the last family vacation we took together. This was last year in Puerto Rico. And from left, of course, is Azim, and then Nasser. Armaan is sitting in the middle. To the right is Elena, who's Miraj's beautiful wife. And then next to Miraj is, I'm sitting next to him. So we had a great, I think it was 1 week in Puerto Rico. It was just, this was in San Juan. And so that was beautiful.
Thank you.
you.
And then I had shared this earlier, the two brothers, and
yes, and this was also in Puerto Rico. And again, you see Armaan and Nasser. This is how the boys took photos, and it's just they're very close. Just physically and emotionally, they always want to be close.
May Allah give comfort through all of these loving memories that you have so many of, and keep those as the ones that are in your heart and in your mind of Armaan as you go through this journey. Samina, do we have any questions that we need to address, or?
One question that has come to me asking Tabassum and her husband is, how do you move on? I don't know if you have the time to get into that.
Yeah. When you say move on, I'm not sure there is a moving on.
There's no moving on.
We are trying to move forward,
Mm-hmm.
and that's about as good as it's going to get, I think. We find a lot of comfort in reminding ourselves about the mercy of Allah, whether it's in reading the Quran or understanding the Hadith more and more. And we know that Armaan is in a better place than where he was with us. So that gives us a lot of comfort. Praying for Armaan. There's a sense of powerlessness, that you feel powerless about the situation. And praying for Armaan is one of the few things that we have found that we can do that can impact Armaan, and it gives us a lot of peace as well to know that I can do something now, though I couldn't do it before, to help Armaan. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. And Tabassum, do you want to talk very quickly about the foundation that you set up?
Yes. So we, like I said, like I began with, Armaan was all about the essence of goodness. The letters, phone calls, texts, messages, memory books that we've received, all just in detail, they tell us how much Armaan has had impacted their lives. Some of them, some stories have said, I met Armaan when I was in the darkest days of my life, and Armaan helped me through it. Were it not for Armaan, I would not be alive today. And when Armaan asked you, how are you? He really wanted to know. And so so in that spirit, we wanted to create a foundation, a memorial fund in Armaan's name, which just happens to be his own money. We have a family culture where the kids always saved. We always told them to save their birthday and Eid and all that, that they couldn't spend it. They had to put it in their investment account. And it for Armaan, it grew into something pretty significant. And with that, and then we and some other things that he had with his car, we put all that together to have good sized seed money for his memorial fund. And then the boys, his brothers, every year will decide how to give that to charity so that it does good things in Armaan's name with his own money. So that is something that we want to do going forward. We know it's significantly small compared to what Armaan would have done on his own had he lived a longer life.
The other thing I also want to be sure to mention is that all of us are using the services of the mental health community right now, and we all use counselors
and
therapists almost every week, and it is very helpful, extremely helpful. If there's anybody else that's processing kind of what we're processing, I would strongly recommend that you use a therapist.
And we had started therapy even before Armaan passed away, because the last several months before Armaan passed away were extremely, extremely difficult. And we couldn't convince Armaan to join these therapy sessions. So we decided to continue with them even without him. So
thank you. Thank you for sharing both of those important pieces.
So there's a lot of clinical questions coming in, and unfortunately, in the interest of time, I don't think we'll be able to address those. It just tells you why this is so needed. Before we conclude with the dua from Brother Ashraf, I just wanted to ask Miraj, Elena, Azim, Emily, and Nasser if they wanted to add anything to this conversation before we end.
Yeah, actually I did. So I think one important thing to keep in mind, and I think is really clear in Armaan's story, is that mental illness doesn't look one particular way. Like if you kind of were looking from the outside, it's like he's like doing amazingly on all these tests, like he's working a ton, like he's very involved, and I think like we have kind of these notions of like, oh, like if you're getting out of bed in the morning, you must not be depressed, or like if you can pass the test, you must be okay, right? And I think like it, like having like space to acknowledge that like you can be like very successful and also really struggling is important, and that we shouldn't like just like to be aware that this could be an issue for people who you wouldn't think necessarily might be struggling is very important.
Thank you. Absolutely. And Azim or Azam and Emily, did you have anything to add? Because I know, and I hear your beautiful granddaughter in the background, so I know she's a godsend. She's like, here I am.
She is here. No, I mean, I would echo what everyone else has said in treating this in the same way that we would treat physical health conditions. And I really appreciate the piece on mental health first aid. I went through that training many years ago as a social worker. And I think it's very valuable training for everyone to participate in. In the same way that I think children know, some of the signs of a heart attack or some of the signs of a stroke. I think it's just important that we are all educated on the early signs of mental health issues so that we can intervene early and feel equipped to do so, right? Like, it is very scary and challenging, and we all need to have the tools in our toolbox to try and help people through this, because when we see people in pain, we want to help. And when we don't have those tools, we don't always know how to. And so I would just encourage others to pursue looking into this and potentially consider getting certified.
Thank you.
I would have one last thing. So I just randomly saw in the comments just a question just about Armaan's close circle of friends and the people around him. Something that was difficult for us to understand going through it was how was Armaan acting one way towards us, but we would never hear about it from anybody else. And the thing is that Armaan had a lot of friends, just both from the Muslim community and from the non-Muslim community. He had very substantial circles of friends, and he was well plugged into local masjids, local MSAs everywhere. And he bettered the life of so many people around him. But what needs to be understood is that for him, he intentionally he didn't let any of his friends know what was happening with him. Again, both in the Muslim and non-Muslim community, nobody knew what was going on. I called and I contacted his friends just to ask them what was he sharing about what he was going through, and none of them just had a clue of what was happening. So sometimes it's that way. It's not that he had isolated himself in any way. He was very social all the way up until the very end. So I will add that, and that's a tough part of this, and it's a tough part of grappling with mental health, because someone who appears to be very healthy might not be that way. And I just want to add that to the end of this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we conclude with the dua, I just want to thank Dr. Tabrusi, Dr. Chuftai, and Sister Yasmin for giving us their insight, and of course, thanking the Halim family for sharing their journey. And I'd ask Brother Ashraf to conclude with the dua.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Again, I just would add my thanks and appreciation and extreme, looking so much for this family as a role model to how they can use something that is so difficult, but still to make benefit for the community and for others, and make others learn something that they don't know currently, and taking advantage, taking this experience and making something much greater that would live as a living legacy for Armaan after his passing away, unfortunately, and they would use it just to help others and educate others. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the peace and tranquility to deal with what they are going through. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the understanding of all the things that went through, and help them go through this period of their life and this journey with the utmost peace in mind, and with the utmost appreciation, and being pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant Armaan the highest of paradise. I would just make a short dua, inshallah Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma laka alhamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhika wa azimi sultanik. Allahumma laka alhamdu hamdan kathiran yuwazi ni'amaka wa yadra'u niqamak. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار. Oh Allah, all praise and thanks and gratitude to you. O Allah, we ask you for the good of this dunya and the good of the hereafter. O Allah, we ask you to protect us, protect our family, protect our community. We ask you, Allah, to grant the Halim family the peace and tranquility they deserve. We ask you, Allah, to reward them the best of reward on account of everything they are doing to help their community and to help others around them. We ask you, Allah, to make them pleased with you, and we ask you, Allah, to be pleased with them. We ask you, Allah, to grant Armaan the highest of paradise, to forgive all his sins and to make him among those who you are pleased with. O Allah, we ask you to give them the perseverance and the patience to deal with what they are going through. اللهم لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا.
Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day.